Welcome to the Livable Law Method. Today's course is going to be about the management of tasks. I am so glad that you are joining me on this journey, and my goal, very simply, is to change your life. The purpose of the Livable Law Method is to simply make the law livable. So let's jump in. The Livable Law Method is process-oriented. It is people-centered, and it uses agile project management techniques. It is a legal project management method, but what I did is that I took agile project management tools and methods and procedures and then implemented them into the practice of law. The reason I chose agile project management is because it is iterative in nature and it allows for cyclical processes, which are very typical in the law, where we do drafting, revisions, reviews, reconsideration, changes of strategy, whatever that may be. If you are not familiar with the Livable Law Method, I'm going to give a very brief primer about what sets it apart from every other method or project management approach. In the law right now, the way management happens is that we assume that process management is the same as matter management. But that is incorrect. In that management world, there is management of the how and management of the what. Managers, as you know them, the partner in charge, the senior associate, the attorneys working on cases, the solo practitioner, whoever it may be, are trained and learn to manage the what. The strategy, the decisions of argument is going to be made, what witness is going to be deposed, what strategy is going to be used, what venue to use, what law to argue. All of that is the what. And unfortunately, the way we practice is that if you've been managing the what for long enough, you just get to manage the how. And no wonder we're burnt out, right? It's a completely different skill set. Managing the how is who is going to do what when? How are we managing bandwidth? How are we managing time commitment? How are we setting deadlines and making sure that everybody and nobody is being overburdened or underutilized? This is what I tried to grapple with when I created the Livable Law Method. Today, right now, we are going to work on getting tools to manage the how of time. The Livable Law Method has 3 pillars, and each of them is then divided into 3 subtopics: the management of tasks, management of time, and management of things. You are here. But before we jump in, we are going to talk about burnout, because the reason that I went out into the world with this idea, that I tried to find a better solution, was because of burnout. So let's talk about what that is. We're going to go way back in time. Once upon a time, in 2001, the ABA asserted that too much emphasis was being placed by firms on billable hour requirements. This is 22 years ago at this point. And this was leading to bill padding and general inefficiency, as well as damaging firm culture. Notice that the focus at the time was not on attorney well-being, correct? It was on how bad is this for clients. So the ABA, in its great wisdom, recommended that the billing expectations should be 2,300 hours annually, and that they should be composed of 1,900 hours billable to clients and a total of 400 additional hours elsewhere. And this is how the ABA broke them down: firm service, pro bono, client development, training and professional development, and professional service. Okay, but let's do a little math here, okay? This translates to 9 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, 48 weeks a year. You do get 4 weeks of vacation, that's nice. But you're working 9 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. I guess we should be grateful we're getting our weekends. But that's not really true. Because the standard guideline for billable hours is that it takes about 10 to 12 hours to bill 8. So to achieve ABA expectations, the reasonable expectations, the lawyers would be expected to work 12 to 15 hours daily. This is insane. This makes the law unlivable. And even if you are not held to a billable hour requirement, the point is that if we are living in a culture, well, that is considered the reasonable position, we are making no efforts at understanding how to make our lives better, because that's the standard. So if you're only billing 1,800 hours a year, you should apparently be grateful. There is no looking into how are we billing these hours? Are we being efficient? Are we being fair? Are we taking care of our teams? That is what I try to do with this method. So we've discovered the dark side of the billable hour, right? There's the wrong incentives to lawyers and to firms. The value proposition to the client is not always valuable. Just because I spent more time on something doesn't actually make it more valuable. And it also creates completely unpredictable invoices, as well as unpredictable hours, by the way. So today we focus on the effect of the billable hour on attorney hours. So 12 to 15 hours a day translates to an 8:30 a.m. start time with an end time of 8:30 to 11:30 p.m. And we wonder why people leave? This assumes that you have absolutely no life outside of the law to take care of. You have no children, no pets, no partners, no parents, nobody to take care of. And most importantly, that you don't want to do that. It assumes a lifestyle that is simply not realistic. Chief Rehnquist in the mid-'80s basically expressed the fact that law firms bent on making as much money as possible would treat associates very much as a manufacturer would treat a purchaser of 100 tons of scrap metal. Because if you use anything less than 100 tons you paid for, you are simply not running an efficient business. And this is how I started coming up with the principles of the livable law method. And the first one is people are not widgets. The point is not to use up humans. And the goal of this course is to teach you how to use time in a way that does not use up the people that are doing the work for you. And that includes you. So what do we do? Well, obviously, firm culture around the number of hours to work has to shift, generally, right? And lawyers can be more efficient with the time available. So that's one step, right? That's one step towards better work-life boundaries. Notice I will never use the term balance. I use the term boundaries. So if lawyers were more efficient, it would allow them to achieve more work in the same amount of time. It would provide more predictable schedules. Less chaos would mean less stress. Lawyers would be able to focus on lawyering rather than everything else. And they would be able to move away from the billable hour, which is my actual dream goal. So one solution was legal project management. But the thing is that legal project management as it existed did not actually answer the questions that were being asked. And a lot of the legal project management you're going to see is about creating more efficiency in the invoicing and the management of the financials or the documents. It's very utilitarian. It doesn't have that human element, and this is what this course is about. So before I jump into the tools I want you to learn through this course, I need to talk to you about burnout. Because if you don't understand where burnout is coming from, then the tools will be less useful to you. So let's start with the basics. Burnout is the reduction of a fuel or substance to nothing through use or consumption. So I'm going to say it again. The reduction of fuel or substance to nothing through use or combustion. So burnout as a syndrome has been defined as emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a sense of low personal accomplishment that leads to decreased effectiveness at work. And I can attest to the fact that that's how it feels. The ICD-11 has a definition of burnout. It is a medical condition, and it is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that is not successfully managed. So there are two parts, right? There is the chronic workplace stress and the fact it is not successfully managed. My goal with the livable law method was to help people successfully manage the chronic stress. That's really where I was going for. And at the same time, if you implement these tools, we would also be able to reduce the chronic work stress. So there is a twofold attack strategy on the issue of burnout and attrition. So there's these 3 dimensions to burnout: a feeling of energy depletion or exhaustion, an increased mental distance from the job or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to the job, and reduced professional efficacy. And then burnout refers specifically to phenomena in the occupational context. It's something about work-related stressors, and it should not be applied to experience other areas of life. So how do you recognize burnout? Well, if you are experiencing persistent feelings of exhaustion, and that translates in you sleep a full night and you wake up and you're tired, you get to Monday and you're still tired, this inability to catch up on your exhaustion, that's really a sign of burnout. That's really, to me, that's the big red flag. When I start not catching up on my energy, I know that I need to do something radical, and I do. There's irritability or impatience with coworkers and clients. And I will say this, it does translate to irritability with people at home, with children and partners and everyone around you. So there's that. There's a mental retreat from work and life. There is the aspect of being hypercritical and cynical at work, which as lawyers makes it hard to be creative and engaged, which we need to in order to be good lawyers. There's self-medicating with food and drink. I've also seen self-medicating with TV shows or online scrolling or social media, right? Like if you are unable to detach from them, if you get lost in it for hours on end because it helps you disengage from the exhaustion of your life, those are signs that I would watch for. There's changes in sleeping habits, and then there's headaches or unexplained physical complaints. Well, how common is burnout? Why do we care? Is it like 2 people? Sure, you and me. That's it. We're the only 2 people experiencing burnout. No, it's really common. It's actually alarmingly common. 86% of female lawyers and 70% of male lawyers experience burnout. And that number is actually really higher for caregivers, 82% for those who are not caregivers. So that's down to 74%. And it's also exceedingly high for members of the global majority. So 86% for Black lawyers, 88% for Hispanic lawyers, and 84% for non-heterosexual lawyers, and 83% of lawyers with a disability. So both for members of the global majority as well as, non-gender conforming or members of the LGBTQ community broadly, as well as members of the community that identifies as having a disability, that there's 80s, in the 80s. That's staggering. That's staggering. If I tell you that you have an 83% of winning the lottery ticket, you'd buy it, right? Like certainty, basically. And the reason for these much higher numbers within these communities is that lawyers who experienced bias, harassment, discrimination, and vicarious trauma report higher burnout, anxiety, and depression. And that makes sense. And there's a reason for this. And it's actually a pretty simple, obvious reason. When you are having to receive these requests for conformity, these demands, these obligations to conform, as well as these constant aggressions and this othering that happens when you belong to certain groups, that takes up bandwidth. That takes up mental energy. And so when you are giving up mental energy for that, and you're giving up mental energy for work, in a chronically stressed environment that is improperly managed, you literally just are burning up more of your bandwidth. That is why there's this higher experiencing of burnout, which is why for me, burnout is a DEI issue, period. So what causes burnout? Well, we've talked about chronic stress and improper management, but what does it mean? Like, why is that the case? Well, let's go with this. Lack of autonomy will drive some people to burnout. High workload and work pressure, that's classic. Lack of leader and colleague support. Unfairness. Values disconnect and lack of recognition. Those are things that cause and lead to burnout. So now I'm going to talk to you about bandwidth. And I mentioned that word, but that is why this course is so important. Because managing time is in part a way to manage the use of your bandwidth, which is limited and needs to be replenished. So when you're looking at somebody's bandwidth, you are looking at their ability to do work. but you are also looking at their ability to mentally, emotionally, and physically engage in their activities of everyday life, including work. Bandwidth is this concept of how much you have to give, how much you have in the tank. So, the first thing to do when managing time is that you need to look at people's individual workload. Lawyers are bad at this. We are both encouraged to be bad at this, we are forced to be bad at this, but we are also naturally bad at this. So some of it is trying to control the factors around you, but some of it is trying to control your own behavior, your own tendencies, because lawyers tend to be overworkers. Let's start with this. If you have a people pleaser in your team, that's someone that you have to watch for burnout. It's someone that will really benefit from you learning these tools we're learning today. People pleasers will go above and beyond. People pleasers will say yes to an assignment when they absolutely don't have time to do it. And then they will just break themselves getting it done. They will deliver, but it will be at a very high cost, and they will not share that cost with you. Which leads me to talk about performance punishment. And this is something, there's some increasingly interesting articles about this. But basically, not only are people pleasers placing themselves in harm's way because they will volunteer or take on work, but also if they are high performers, they are being punished for their high performance, which is another reason that you should really want to be doing these courses. It's because burnout and attrition drives out good people. And it drives them out because they get both overutilized and because they are trained to overutilize themselves. Your high performers are the ones that are going to keep receiving assignments. The high performers are the ones that are going to be expected to go above and beyond, which I hate that phrase. It's a whole other lecture. And this results in performance punishment. They are being punished with more work because they're high performers. Eventually they'll leave. Or they will break. And then you're going to have people who tend to kind of fly under the radar, who maybe don't do as much work as they should be doing. And that happens. And it's kind of infuriating. I'm going to share 2 anecdotes with you, which one was terrible and one was funny. So I'll start with the terrible one. I used to work at a law firm where at the time, I did not understand this, but they were crushing me. And they were an abusive law firm. And the thing is that they were actually very nice in person, mostly. Everyone was, most people were very decent. And some were absolutely wonderful people. But the leadership all the way at the top had absolutely no interest in maintaining our well-being. And so I was working an extraordinary number of hours. I was billing anywhere from 70 to 80 hours every single week for month after month after month after month. And it included traveling 2 to 3 nights every single week for over a year. It was absolutely exhausting. And I just thought that if I worked hard, that's just what I needed to be doing. But occasionally I would tell the partner in charge, the owner of the firm, hey, I need more paralegal support. Like, I'm just not getting the support that I need, and I need a paralegal to help me. And the answer was, you just can't hack it. I mean, you don't need more help. And if you do need more help, it's because you can't do the job. Stop saying that to people. If a high performer comes to you and says they need more help, it should set off so many fire alarms that your head should be ringing. Because your high performer is telling you they can't do more. And if you're in charge of managing time, managing the how, you need to be taking care of that. So that's my example for the people-pleasing performance punishment part of this section. Now I'm going to give you the other side. It's funny. I was talking to a junior associate, and she had prepared for a hearing on a somewhat nuanced, delicate issue. And she goes in and she gives her argument. And the other side is a guy, a much older guy, who hasn't even read the case they're arguing, is not very well prepared, and he's just winging it. And we win the argument, which is fine. And then she gets back and she's furious. I mean, she is so angry. And I'm like, why are you so mad? You did great. She says, why does he get away with showing up so unprepared and doing the bare minimum? And I said, look, that's going to happen. And she was just so angry because she had worked so hard and opposing counsel hadn't. Now, look, the thing is this. Some lawyers do the bare minimum. And thankfully, this person was outside the firm. But the tools we're learning today and part of legal project management, and one way to avoid burnout and attrition in your firm is to watch for the people who fly under the radar and do the bare minimum. Because not only is it not fair because you're not getting what you're supposed to be getting out of that person who's doing the work, but it is definitely going to overburden your overachievers and your people pleasers, and is going to contribute to burnout and attrition. And it is only, especially if there's a gender dynamic at play, it is definitely going to play into that, because the woman in this scenario will feel like she has to overperform to receive basically the same or less recognition than the man in the firm who is doing the bare minimum. And so it is important to keep it in mind if the gender dynamics are at play, even more so, because there's a double whammy on the attorney who is being overburdened. Which brings me to another livable law principle. The work week is finite. I need you to believe that. I need you to accept that. There is a work week, and there is a time outside the work week when work is done. And the point of managing time is so that you can do more work during the work week and then leave yourself and other people alone outside of that time. Which is why I always talk about boundaries, not balance. I am not balancing my life with my work. I am creating healthy boundaries around my work to protect my life. Once you're understood the factors at play with individual workload, you need to be looking at team workload. How is the team working together? And this is where you will want to start using tools such as a task matrix or a task list or a task management system. Now, today we're not doing management of tasks, so I'm not going to lecture about it. That is in another course that I have out there and is in my book. But right now, if you are not using a task management tool, you should immediately. Because that is the only way you are going to adequately and appropriately track your entire team workload. It will allow you to track productivity and busyness. It will allow you to track transparently who is actually delivering work, who is doing too much, who is doing too little. You should ask team members to report on their tasks, and you should ask them to report on them regularly. And again, in the livable law universe, there is a thing called a scrum, which is a 15-minute daily meeting where people report on their tasks. And there is a weekly matrix review meeting where the entire task matrix is reviewed and everybody gets to contribute, and you can look at who's done what, who needs help, and so on and so forth. But if you don't have those things in place, you are not going to be able to adequately track your team workload, which means that you cannot adequately track the use and abuse of the bandwidth. And lastly, you should absolutely encourage open dialogue about bandwidth. You should be open and transparent and genuine about the fact that people should come to you if they are feeling that they are being buried in work. If they feel like they can't handle it or something's not going well, it should not be a taboo subject, and it certainly should not be something that people get looked down on for. Which brings me to another livable law principle. Self-care without team care is futile. You cannot bubble bath your way out of a toxic workplace environment. Period. If you're not taking care of your team, asking them to take care of themselves is pushing responsibility onto them for something that they can't control.